Colleen, thank you very much for coming into VCOSS today. We do appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
I just wanted to start by asking you, what makes you different to the other major parties who are contesting the election?
For the Greens, it's about integrity. What you see is what you'll get. We will come into this next Parliament transparent. Our policies are up on the website. The initiatives are up on the website. And we base those on evidence rather than people's far-fetched ideas, and we'll be sticking to them. And sometimes over the years, this has caused the Greens problems in that we have said, no, this is the evidence, we're sticking to this policy. It may not have been popular then, but 15 years ago, we were told we were crazy for believing in climate change. We were right.
Thank you. And can you talk a bit about, in terms of the Greens end up holding the balance of power, be it in either House of Parliament, what would be the agreements that you would be seeking from either party in terms of holding that balance of power?
It's been a conversation we've been having for several weeks now, and it's one we're really trying to grapple with. But we kind of have to take one step back. We're not actually in balance of power yet. We've got a week to go. I am very marginal. I'll have to be re-elected. We need to gain one more member in the upper house and at least one, if not two members in the lower house to actually have balance of power. But if we are in that situation, we are going to use it for good rather than evil. And we will be looking at obviously the promises we've already made in our policies, talking about how we're actually going to implement those. We're going to actually need to start negotiating whoever it is who will form government. And I also think it's really important for the sector to think over this next week, what can we do to really push both Labor and Liberal to say, this is what we think needs to happen, get them to be agreeing to those things. And then when we are hopefully in balance of power, we can just go in and say, you've already agreed to this, when are we going to start it?
So if you are in balance of power, is there anything that's a non-negotiable for you that you'd be able to put up front and say, well, no matter what, this is something we'd be requiring?
Well, it's a bit more the opposite, that it'll be East-West link. We won't negotiate on that. Yep. We won't support any government who thinks that that's going to be built, but it's more what we won't rather than what we will at this stage. But I would hope to be able to make much more definitive announcements before the week is up.
Sure, thank you. In terms of jobs, we've got a situation at the moment where really Victoria is in dire straits. We're only just ahead of Hobart in terms of looking at our unemployment rate. So unemployment's increasing, particularly youth unemployment is increasing as well. In terms of the Greens plan for addressing that, could you elaborate on that?
We think TAFE is pivotal to this. All right, you're a car worker, you've lost your job. How do you retrain? Do you go to a dodgy training authority? The money's paid over to them, you get a certificate in 2 days, it means absolutely nothing. Or do we restore TAFE? We restore the standards, and so that people can be properly retrained. For young people, clearly TAFE is a real answer about getting the kind of qualifications that will actually get them a job, not going again to a private training authority, a dodgy certificate. There's no job at the end of it. We need to be able to train people into the jobs that are required. And for young people in particular, when you read those stories about the numbers of applications young people make, how desperate they're feeling, and it erodes people's confidence. And so it's not just about the retraining, it's making sure that we're giving them enough confidence to be able to keep looking for work.
So in terms of then looking at high quality training providers is clearly on the agenda. Any other policies at the moment on job creation?
We don't actually have any other policies at this stage, but clearly the kinds of things that a number of sectors have been talking about is the need for employers to be able to receive assistance for taking on especially young people. Clearly there are problems for newly arrived communities that they need special help to be able to get jobs. And while I'm not saying that we have complete policies, really happy to work with the people who actually know what's required to come up with the answers.
Fantastic, thank you. In terms of looking at housing in this election, I know when you spoke at the VCOSS AGM earlier this week, you spoke about the Greens' commitment to housing.
Yes.
Would you be able to, can you elaborate on how the Greens will address what we think is a crisis around affordable housing and around social housing as well?
We think that there are several ways of doing that. One, you need to increase the actual public housing stock. So money's got to be spent. You need to look at ways that you can get people into private rental, which for most people now is just completely out of the realms of affordability. Looking at a number of new projects that have been built, especially in and around the inner city. How many of those buildings have actually, do we need quotas to say if you're building 100, 10 of these have to be social or public housing? We need to be much more innovative. We need to look at the kinds of things that the City of London have done and making those, especially those big developers, take on some social responsibility as well. Practical things that can be done is what we'll be looking at.
Fantastic, thank you. In terms of the education maintenance allowance, which has been scrapped by the current government, so given that the education maintenance allowance currently provides an amount of money to school children, so about 200,000 school children, to enable them to pay for costs such as books, uniforms, etc. That's been scrapped by current government. The ALP have made some announcements to look at redressing that in some ways. The Liberal Party's view is that, well, actually the money will go to a smaller number of schools, but it won't be targeted at individual students. What's the Greens' view in terms of the education maintenance allowance, and what would your policy look like around that?
We haven't costed this at this stage, but clearly it's a problem because to keep young people in schools, they need to be able to get their uniforms, their books, all of those things. And for a lot of families, that's impossible. So we need to take that step back. How is it working? Who is it helping? Is there ways that we can make it work better? But clearly, it is something that is needed. But at this stage, we haven't costed it.
Okay, thank you. Going further again in looking at education, but particularly youth and youth connections.
Yes.
One of the issues that I guess draws unemployment together as well as education is the Youth Connections program, which has been funded by the federal government, but is due to end at the end of this year. Now that program's had a very high level of success in linking up young people with unemployment, with employment opportunities and with educational opportunities. So from the perspective of the Greens, given that this was a federal program, what's your view about, does Victoria have a role in actually filling the gap that Youth Connections look like, and would you have a policy to replace it?
And it is one of those problems that it is an incredibly successful program and it's federally funded.
Yes.
So I think we'd need to take a few different angles on this. One, our federal senators and MPs are working really hard to get it restored because it should never have been cut in the first place. It's just downright mean to cut these kind of programs. But do we say that the Victorian government should take it up? I think it needs to be looked at because, especially, as you have said, our youth unemployment figures are some of the worst in the country. So clearly it's a program that works. It should be supported. But again, we need to look at the cost, and we haven't done that at this stage.
Okay.
But it's one we support.
You support the principle?
Totally.
Yep. Okay, fantastic. In terms of looking at child protection, so obviously foster carers are looking after some of the most vulnerable children in the Victorian community. And one of the key issues we have is that while the demand for foster care is increasing, the number of foster carers is decreasing at the same time. How will you support foster carers and how will you attract more of them?
There are two things, and we've done a lot of work with the Foster Carers Association, and what's really clear to me is you speak to all those foster carers who have got hearts as big as rooms, but they can't keep affording the expenses. They're not looking for wages. As we all know, they just want those costs reimbursed, but they also want easy access to the speech pathologist, to the psychologist, to the special equipment that the child that they're fostering might need. And so clearly we have to up the expenses for foster carers. I think that's clear, and that's the first thing we need to do. And then the way, we need to run those advertising campaigns, we need to connect, especially to communities who might not have thought that that's something that they could do. And especially, making it so that possibly, children from a particularly religious group or ethnic group might be able to then go to a family in that same group. But if these people don't know that this is possible, how can we attract them as foster carers? And I think the model that Care With Me has used in the Muslim community is one that we should look at for other communities.
Okay, thank you. In terms of looking at justice, the Greens have released policies around justice reinvestment. Clearly at VCOSS, given our remit is around protecting those who are most vulnerable, disadvantaged and in poverty, we're very interested in this area. Can you speak more to your policies around justice reinvestment, and I guess more also to looking at how we change the conversation from being one where we actually lock more people up to actually investing early and looking at early prevention and intervention?
So clearly you've got a group of people who have to be in jail. They're violent and they can't live in the community. But is that everybody? It's not. Clearly people go into prison usually because of poverty, and particularly women. And so we need to take a step back. Let's look at the economics of this. If it's a drug issue, $120,000 a year is the average for keeping someone in prison. In a drug rehabilitation program, we're looking at $30,000 or $40,000 a year, and that person might not then reoffend. Look at the programs that are actually going to stop the person offending in the first place or reoffending. And a lot of that's going to be around really basic things too, is around TAFE. The levels of illiteracy of people who are in prison is incredibly high. So specialist programs, all of these things are actually a lot less costly than keeping someone in prison. And I know, especially this current government and other governments, we'll be tough on crime, but are we actually being tough on crime, or are we just being tough on people who are disadvantaged, don't have any opportunities, and have got caught in that reoffending mode? It's going to be a lot cheaper to actually look at the needs of those people, help them retrain, get them back on the right track than it is to keep sending them back to prison. That's
right. I guess from VCOS's point of view, we're really interested in how do we change that conversation in broader community, because we feel that the tough on crime tends to be more appealing to the electorate rather than the smart on crime.
I think this is an interesting thing, because I think the community is actually quite evenly divided on this, because you certainly have a group of people who just, tough. But there's also a group of people who, does this work? Are we spending all of this money? Why are we building another prison at Ravensall, but we're closing down TAFE? I think people are starting to make the connections that tough on crime isn't actually the best way for our community to be. And clearly to the kinds of legislation that this government's brought in around suspended sentences, baseline sentences, judges are employed for their intellect and their knowledge of the law. They know how to sentence people. Sometimes they get it wrong, but not very often.
Thanks. In terms of disaster response, again, you spoke at the VCOSS AGM around wanting to have a stronger emphasis, I guess, on management of emergency events, and in particular looking at heat waves. Can you elaborate on that some more?
Heat waves, it's been very interesting, because dealing with a government that are climate change deniers, they can't plan for heat wave. And in the heat wave last year, we looked at a few very basic steps about what we thought could work as a plan. Clearly it's local government that needs to deliver it, but they need to be paid for it. So if we had a fairly simple system of, asking councils what it would cost them per day to keep the libraries open, the public buildings, keep the sprinklers going in the parks, having one entry fee into the swimming pool, so people have got somewhere to go, especially with small children. They've got cool places to go. With older people, especially HAC clients who local government will know who they are, to be transported to those cool places. But they're going to need money, and they're going to need to calculate. So, all right, if that costs $50,000 per day of a heat wave, we trigger it after day 2, and then we know that we can go to the government and say, we've done so many heat wave days in this period, this is how much we need to be reimbursed for, because local government can't carry it. But we have to start with the acknowledgement that it's going to reoccur. And the most vulnerable people are low-income people, people who live in high-rise, older people who might have air conditioning but they can't afford to turn it on, and who need monitoring. And for families, not all families can go to the big shopping complexes and go to 2 or 3 movies. We need a whole set of ways of dealing with that. But the first thing is to acknowledge it is actually going to happen.
Yep. And in terms of acknowledging that it's going to happen, acknowledging the role of local government, the community sector plays a really pivotal role in terms of looking at disaster management and when it comes to heat waves or other things, for example, of the fire in Morwell.
Yes.
Could you talk a bit more about, if the Greens were to have a specific policy around this, how that would address the role of the community sector?
The community sector have to be brought on board before the disaster actually happens. We need to be using the expertise. I think the thing quite clearly about Morwell, and that's where I was born and raised, and I lived very close to the edge of the cut. I know that community. They weren't told what was going on. People who were working there weren't being told what was going on. I think the government just kind of hoped it would not happen. It is a clear example of what you don't do during a disaster. We have to learn our lesson there, and we have to be really open with people right at the start, tell them what the risks are and help evacuate them if they need. And that's where I think clearly the role of the community sector comes in, because there'll be all the different groups will have clients who they know really well. They will know what their needs are. Emergency agencies need to go to those agencies, and we need to be talking to each other. And this kind of planning can be done, it can be done well, but it needs to be done, beforehand. We need to start again.
So in terms of then looking at a statewide response, we have the situation in Victoria where we have a statewide plan for a tsunami, but we don't have the situation, we've got a statewide plan for a heat wave.
I know.
So did the Greens commit to having a statewide plan for a heat wave?
Absolutely. This is really important. And I live in the western suburbs. I've gone through several major chemical fires where evacuation was not well managed. Going down to Morwell during that disaster, I could see what was happening to my family and people I went to school with. And the fact that we have a tsunami plan but not a heatwave plan is beyond comprehension. We need a complete overhaul of the way we manage disasters.
In terms of, just shifting to another topic now, on the Auditor General and the role of the Auditor General, looking at the increase in powers, I guess, that the Auditor General has. So in Victoria, we're seeing a significant increase in the number of public-private partnerships that are entered into. There's recently been significant commentary around the role of the Auditor General, and we do have a particular interest in making sure that when investment is made, actually the public good is a key consideration of this, and we have a keen interest in making sure that the scrutiny that the Auditor General can provide is increased. Do the Greens, what's your view in terms of increasing the powers of the Auditor General, and would the Greens commit to doing so if they held the balance of power?
The Auditor General is incredibly important, and the Greens use those reports constantly because they're an authoritative organisation. The current Auditor General and previous have raised this issue. We think it is logical to extend their powers because we want to know about those private public partnerships. So we would support such an increase in powers.
Thank you for clarifying. And one final question, and we spoke about this at the VCOSS AGM last week as well, is in terms of looking at for the community sector and fulfilling, given that the community sector has obligations to pay their workers in accordance with the Equal Remuneration Order. Now, I understand, so you've made a commitment to doing that.
As a former SACS worker, I absolutely have to. Yes. No, it's logical, but the agencies cannot afford it to do it unless they're funded properly.
Thank you. And in terms of the indexation as well to community sector organisations, are you in a position to talk about your commitment in respect to that?
What I can say is that we would be wanting to sit down with the sector and actually working out precisely what that indexation rate should be rather than me saying what it should be and negotiate that. But clearly, having worked in the sector, I know those dilemmas, and we will want to negotiate that and realistically negotiate it, not you come up with the figure that, because we trust the sector and we know that they're not going to go for an indexation figure that is hugely over what they actually need. So if you're coming up with a figure, I don't see how we could disagree with it.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you very much for your time and coming in today, Colleen. We know it's been an incredibly busy time for you. I think you've been at just about every forum that the community sector has held throughout this time.
Yes, so the advantage of having 13 portfolios.
So